Hi everyone, how you doing? Mr. Davis here. Just want to give you a quick run through on some of the key questions that people were getting a little bit mixed up with on the recent paper 1 and paper 2 assessment. Okay, I'm going to share the full mark scheme with you so you can purple pen your answers and put in all corrections. But these are some of the more common questions where people struggled a little. Okay, so the first one where people struggled a little bit was to do with this one where you had to present a set of information based on the performance of a skill. In this case, it was a rugby player throwing the ball in at a line out. So a line out is like a football throw in, but it's called a line out in rugby. So most people got that the type of joint. So for the type of joint, you're only ever going to be looking at hinge joints and ball and socket joints. So hinge joints are elbow and the knee. So you can clearly see it says elbow. So you know that's going to be hinge joint. Most people got that. Okay, the agonist, as we know, is the muscle that's working to produce the movement. So on this one, when you're straightening the arm, in this case, the agonist, as most people said, is the triceps. The bit that people got mixed up with is the type of contraction. Okay, so, and the reason why I think you got mixed up is at best, people were putting in either isotonic or isometric. But you need to be a little bit more detailed on this one. So when it's asking for types of contraction, you need to say whether it's concentric or eccentric. So those are the two types of isotonic. So just to be clear, isotonic is where there's a change in muscle length and that leads to movement. And isometric is where there's no change in muscle length and therefore no movement. Okay, so when you're looking at this, obviously there's movement involved in this, so it's isotonic. There's two types of isotonic. You have got concentric and eccentric. Concentric, the muscle goes from being quite long to being quite short, and eccentric goes the other way. So it goes from being relatively short to being longer. Okay, as we know, an eccentric contraction only takes place during controlled downward movement. This isn't controlled downward movement, so it has to be concentric. So here, type of contraction is a concentric contraction. Okay, if, for example, you were looking at something like a squat or the lowering down of a bicep curl or a press up, anything where there's controlled downward movement, that would be eccentric. So when it asks for a type of contraction, it's asking you, is it concentric or eccentric? And it's only ever eccentric if it's a controlled downward movement. Okay, the next part of the question asked you an old favorite to do with lever systems. So it actually spells it out exactly what you need to do. Use the image, name it, sketch it, and label it. And that's what you get the 3 marks for. So the first thing you should be doing, identify what type of lever system it is. Admittedly, this is the one that is the common one to mistake. It's at the elbow, but it's above the head. Okay, so it could either be first or third class, but because it's above the head, that is then first class lever. So you get a mark for saying that. You then need to sketch it. So you draw your lever arm, you go through your rhyme, 1, 2, 3, F, R, E. So F is in the middle, so that's what the rhyme tells me. Then it doesn't matter which way round you do this. Effort on one side, resistance on the other. Resistance will always go down. To counter that on this one, the effort will also go down. Okay, so now I've sketched it and I've also labeled it. I'm going to suggest that you actually write in the full term just to be clear, just in case. As long as you've put at the very least, put the letters, you'll probably be all right, but we don't want to risk losing marks on a question we know the answer to. So on a lever systems, first class lever is the neck or an overarm type of throw. Second class is always the ankle. So the neck or overarm. Second one is always going to be any movement to do with the ankle. And the third one, essentially you're looking at the elbow, but just not overarm. So for instance, the upward phase of a bicep curl, anything that's not above the head would be third class. Okay, and then you just remember FRE 1, 2, 3, and that tells you which lever system or what's in the middle of each lever system. So on the first class, it's the fulcrum. Second class, it's the resistance, and the third class, it's the effort. Okay, the next one. So this was one I reckon people probably just didn't quite understand exactly how to answer the question, even though you probably knew the answer. So 3 negative effects that obesity could have on performance in a named racket sport. So firstly, you have to name the racket sport in the question. And a few people just weren't doing that. So you have to actually say, so for example, I might say in tennis, done that part of my answer. And then you need to say 3 negative effects. Now, the easiest way to do this is comment on fitness components, okay? But you don't get the mark for just saying a lack of flexibility, a lack of speed, a lack of agility. You have to say what the impact is going to be, because it's asking you about what it could have, the effect on performance. So, for example, you might comment on a lack of flexibility, and the impact is you're going to struggle to reach the shot. So I'm just doing this in note form. Obviously, you're going to write this out as a statement, but you're going to struggle to reach wide shots, for example, in tennis. Okay, so that's my reason. I might also say there'll be a lack of agility, and that's going to lead to struggle to change direction quickly. And finally, maybe a lack of power. And again, struggle, always link power to what type of movement? To jump for high shots. Okay, so you're given a reason. You've got a lack of flex in tennis, a lack of flexibility will cause me to struggle. I'll write this in here. Struggle to reach wide shots. Lack of agility will mean there's a struggle to change direction quickly, and a lack of power would lead to a struggle to jump for high shots. So nothing overly complicated there. You just need to be clear about what the impact is, focusing on 3 fitness components. You don't have to focus on those ones, but you know, in tennis, those are pretty key ones. Okay, then we're looking at this question to do with quantitatively and qualitatively. So firstly, you have to name the fitness test for cardiovascular endurance. So I'm going to go with, you can either just call it the bleep test. The proper name is the multi-stage fitness test. Now, most people got that. 1 or 2 weird answers that people put down about kind of some sort of training that you might be able to do. But the standard test for this is the bleep test. Then you kind of use the question here to frame your answer. How could you evaluate your test performance quantitatively? You could evaluate your test performance quantitatively. It's harder to say than it is to write, I think, he says. Quantitatively by recording the score, i.e. what level you got to. So your result. And then the second one, you'd write that out again. You could evaluate your test qualitatively by focusing on the opinions of the performers. Did they put in a maximum effort? Could they done a little bit better? Okay, so quantitatively is all about statistics, data, outcome, results, and you have to comment on the particular result that you're taking out of the test. So in this case, it's about the levels that you got to on the bleep test. And qualitatively is about the opinion of the performer. Did they go as far as they can? Did they drop out early? Was that their best effort? Okay, but key word is opinions. Okay, next one. This is from paper 2 now. So it's self-paced or externally paced. Now, self-paced skills, people were just saying comments like, it's about controlling the skill. And that's not wrong, but it's not entirely right either. And I'm not sure you're going to get the mark. So for self-paced, it is about controlling. It is about control, but you're controlling the start and speed of the movement. That's what makes it self-paced. It's the pace of it that you're controlling. Okay, and externally paced is simply not in control of the start and the speed of the movement. So that's straightforward. You then need to give the examples. So self-paced, e.g., and remember, we've got a little bank of go-to examples for this sort of skill classification question. Self-paced, we're looking at basketball free throw. You control the start and the speed of that skill. Externally paced, the rugby tackle. You do not control the start and speed of that movement. It's not up to you entirely when you would tackle someone. If they're not there to be tackled, if they've changed direction or moved or slowed down, you have to react to that. So you can only tackle them. An even more obvious one is the start of the 100 meters. Yeah, so you could have rugby tackle, or when it's to do with this, start of the 100 meters race. You can't just run whenever you want. You have to wait for the gun to go off. That signals the start and how quickly you're allowed to begin the movement. Okay, so that's crucial for this one. Comments are about the start and the speed. Okay, people struggled a bit with this one, so I just want to go through the process here. So 3 marks, blood doping. There's 3 comments you can make. I'm not going to write it out in full here. I just want to give you the idea of the comments. So the first part is to do with the removal of blood. So a few weeks maybe before the event, maybe even longer, you remove blood from your system and it's frozen. Okay, so you don't throw it away, you freeze it because you're going to come back to it later. The second part is that your body adjusts to that and produces more red blood cells to compensate for the loss. Okay, so it's realized that there's been some blood that's been removed and it produces more red blood cells to then compensate, to get it back up to the levels it wants to. And then a few days maybe before the event, you then inject that frozen blood. Obviously you don't put it in when it's cold, but inject the blood that's been removed. So essentially, you then have more blood in your system. More blood, more red blood cells, more oxygen going to those working muscles. So 3-part process. You remove blood initially, and it's not just a case of then injecting it back in, but this middle bit is the crucial bit because your body is naturally producing more red blood cells then to compensate for it. So then when you do inject the blood back in, you're actually at a much higher level. So from here, afterwards, you're up here. You're kind of supercharged. You've got more blood, more red blood cells, and more oxygen going to the working muscles. obviously comes with various dangers, but that's not what this question's about. Okay, this is just about the process. This one, arousal. Okay, so you need to justify which performer is most likely to perform the rugby tackle successfully. And there's 3 key points, again, you're just going to try and make. Okay, so the first one is just the identification of the right player, and you just got to link it in to their, it's always about the arousal levels. So on this one, the easiest way to do it, and I know some people still don't do it like this, but the easiest way is to pick the extreme option. There's always a middle option, okay? And there's a certain way of getting the marks to go with the middle option, but that's not the easiest way to get the marks. So the easiest way is going to go for the extreme one, probably the more obvious one. And that's, in this case, player 2, because they have the highest arousal. So you have to comment on the arousal there. You can't just say player 2. You then need 2 points to justify it. The first one's really straightforward. I'm not going to write it out in full here, but the rugby tackle, and this is the key bit, tends to require a high level of arousal. It tends to. In general, there are alternatives where it might require a lower level of arousal, but it tends to. Okay, it tends to require high levels of arousal. You could think of other sports where it may require a more subtle touch, and it might tend to require a more subtle touch, but there might also be instances where you need to play it with a little bit more force, and that would require a higher level of arousal. But we're just going to keep it straightforward here. It tends to. And then the final one, you've got a few options. You can link then that high level of arousal to power. In this case, if it was low levels of arousal, you'd link it to accuracy. But this one we're linking to power. Or you can just go straight into saying this is the best one, and number 1 and 3 are just too low, okay, to perform that skill successfully. So there's in your exam, it might be that this question is worth more marks and you need to comment on more things. But for now, player 2, because they've got the highest level of arousal. Rugby tackle tends to require high levels of arousal, and you could either then have high arousal leads to power, which is required for the tackle, or just simply that 1 and 3 are too low to perform the tackle successfully. 1 is very low, and you're just going to get wiped out. 2 is still a little bit timid. It's below the optimum level of arousal. Okay, so you could say that one here. That's a good phrase to use. Let me whiz it in. Optimum. Optimum or optimal level of arousal is the perfect point where you want that arousal level to be. Okay, on this one, so a named skill. So again, you have to name the skill when you're explaining your answer. You can't just put down the basic information. So say, for example, from a name skill from a team game. So for example, I mean, you could go with anything, but let's just go simple. Let's just go passing football. And then the 2 marks. The first part of this input stage is using your senses. Okay. And why do you use your senses? You use your senses to pick up information from either the environment, or a fancy word for this is the display. The display is just what's going on around you and in front of you. Okay. So, for example, in passing in football, you use your sensors, and you might comment on a few, for instance, your vision, to see the information on the display, on the environment, e.g. teammates. Okay, and then the final bit, to take it on a level, they would use selective attention. Selective attention is all about filtering. So you filter out key info, e.g. teammates. Disregard, might call irrelevant information. So what's irrelevant in terms of performing this skill? The crowd. Not fussed about where the crowd are. You're not really concerned about the noise of the crowd. That's less information. So you disregard that and you can just focus on the position of the teammates. Okay, those are the key bits of information I think that people struggled with a little bit. Can you please go through the full test paper to make sure that you've purple penned everything and put in all corrections, and then just focus on making sure that you understand these key questions that we've just gone through here. Okay, guys, take it easy and bye-bye.